Donald Trump was all the talk last week in U.S. politics, despite being a no-show at a key Republican debate.
I kind of miss Donald Trump. He was a little teddy bear to me.
It's not about Donald Trump. He's an entertaining guy. He's the greatest show on earth.
Gosh, if you guys ask one more mean question, I may have to leave the stage.
That didn't stop his rivals from taking a few jabs at the front runner. Trump pulled out of the debate after a dispute with Fox News. He held his own event at the same time, just a short drive away. This is a critical time for all candidates from both parties. It's the last chance for them to gain support ahead of the Iowa caucuses tomorrow. For more, let's turn to our U.S. political panel. Joining us this week is Paul Brandis of the West Wing Reports and Louisa Savage of Politico, both in our Washington studio. Nice to see you both there. You've survived that storm from last week. Trump says he made the right decision by not going to Thursday's debate, calling it a risk. Louisa, do you think that the risk paid off for him?
You know, strangely, this man keeps breaking all the rules and succeeding at it. And yes, it did pay off for him. And the reason is it was a big pylon on his biggest rival, Ted Cruz. The senator got pummeled by his opponents and really had some really tough questions from the moderators. They showed clips of past speeches he gave, past statements he'd made on immigration, and showed that he's been very inconsistent, and this really hurts Ted Cruz. So when your biggest rival is getting all the hard fire and you're not on the stage, turns out that helps you. And now Trump is in a solid position, 5 points ahead in this weekend's poll in the Iowa and the Des Moines Register newspaper. So he's feeling pretty good, I think, about his decision.
But Paul, the other candidates, they really tried to, make him seem like, I don't know, a sucky baby, like that. He's not going to kind of like show up at a debate. What's he going to do when Vladimir Putin calls? Is he just going to not answer the phone or not return the calls? So do you think that may have hurt Trump at all, that kind of talk?
Well, there's no question that it hurt Cruz, Andrew, but on some level, I suspect just instinctively that it actually might have done Trump a little bit of harm in the following way. I think Iowans want to hear from people who come to their state and are seeking their vote, and for him to skip the very last debate, I think might actually insult at least a couple of people. And if you look at the number of folks on the Republican side who say they are still undecided, it's about 40% of all Republicans who still say they do not know who they're going to vote for. So while Cruz really got a pounding the other night, I think Trump perhaps might have done a little bit of damage as well. That being said, though, the poll still shows, as Louisa said, that he's got a 5-point lead. I think he's going to win, but he did appear to be a bit of a crybaby, I think, by running off and having some event ostensibly on to benefit veterans.
And what's interesting about Iowa, we can't get too deep into this because we don't have a lot of time, but what I'm interested to see is that it's open voting, right? You have to kind of convince people openly to come to your side. So I wonder what kind of impact that could have on Donald Trump. What do you think, Louisa?
Well, on the Republican side, it's still just a regular vote, but it's at a specific time. So it requires people to make a certain commitment. You can't just walk in and vote anytime you want. You have to show up when you're told, spend a certain amount of time there. It's a big commitment. So the question is, all these new people that are being brought into the process who are not part of the establishment, not used to voting in these caucuses, will they actually make that commitment for Trump? Or do they just tell pollsters, yeah, I'm for Trump, I've never voted before, here I come. But then when it comes down to it, do they really show up? On the Democratic side, yes, they have to actually stand in front of their neighbors, make the case for their candidate, and persuade those who are undecided. And it's the most fascinating moment, I think, in the American primary process. And that is going to be an interesting situation for Hillary Clinton, because the Bernie Sanders people are so enthusiastic and so passionate about the Bernie revolution. And it's unclear to me whether her supporters are equally motivated to get out there and spend a whole evening trying to persuade people to vote for Hillary.
And we'll get to that in a second. And Louisa, thank you for politely kind of, making me understand the difference between the Republican caucuses and the Democratic caucuses. I'm trying to get up on my American Politics 101. But Paul, let me ask you, just before we move on to Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton, if Donald Trump does in fact win Iowa, what is the significance of that for him moving forward and for the Republicans?
Well, let me add something real quickly to the last question that I think is important. It's really important to note that the biggest voting bloc in Iowa is not Republicans, it's not Democrats, it's actually independents. And Iowa is known as a closed state, meaning that if you're an independent, you can't vote for a Republican or a Democrat. You have to actually re-register to vote and then show up at the appointed time, as Louisa mentioned. So if the biggest bloc in Iowa are independents, what are they going to do? I think that is a huge wild card that has yet to be answered. And so far, the data does suggest that not a lot of those folks have actually re-registered on either side. So I think that's a really big wild card going into tomorrow. Now, as for Trump, I think he is going to win. He has an even bigger lead in New Hampshire, and there are some Republican operatives who say that if he wins Iowa, which appears likely, if he wins New Hampshire, which appears likely, he's ahead in South Carolina, the next state, he could run the table. I suspect just as they underestimated him 6 months ago, perhaps the pendulum is swinging the other way now, and maybe they're overestimating him. But it looks like right now he's in a pretty good spot nevertheless.
All right, so let's talk about the Democrats a little bit more. Louisa, there was another blow for the Clinton campaign. The White House confirmed her private server did contain top secret material, and this, of course, dates back to her time as Secretary of State. So for someone, Louisa, who has been touting her experience throughout the campaign, this has got to hurt, right?
This has the Democratic Party really, really nervous because, as we know, mishandling classified documents, look at the case of David Petraeus. This was a guy who had some documents in his house in a safe that wasn't locked, and he ended up having to plead guilty to mishandling classified information, got 2 years probation. So you could see some kind of situation like that where someone close to Hillary, or even Hillary herself, Hillary Clinton, gets in trouble, gets indicted, which would be disastrous for the campaign. We don't know what was in these documents. They haven't been released. Perhaps they were merely newspaper articles about the drone program, which was considered classified but was being reported all over the place. It could be something as innocuous as that, but we don't really know. So this creates an incredible amount of uncertainty around her and her campaign, and that's why you're seeing people like Michael Bloomberg flirting with the idea of running, because they're thinking, look, if it's not Hillary, do we really want Bernie Sanders, or do we have some kind of fallback alternative?
And Paul, we've talked about how Iowa can certainly set an early momentum in a campaign, but is it really a good benchmark for who will become a party's presidential nominee?
Well, it certainly is on the Democratic side. There's a strong correlation going back the last 25, 30 years in terms of who wins. The Iowa caucus has, in fact, gone on to win the nomination. It put two Democratic presidents on the map, Jimmy Carter in 1976 and, of course, Obama in 2008. On the Republican side, the correlation is not quite as strong. Rick Santorum actually tied for the win in 2012, and prior to that, it was Mike Huckabee. They didn't actually go very far after that. So I think it's hard to make a case on the Republican side that there's a correlation. But nevertheless, this year has just changed every assumption that we've had about American politics. So if Trump wins, which I think appears likely, I think all bets are off.
All right. So very quickly before we go, I want predictions. And I think you've just said, Paul, that you just said Trump is going to take Iowa. Louisa, you agree that Trump will take Iowa for the Republicans?
I think the most authoritative polls in Iowa are certainly pointing in that direction, so I'd have to go with that.
All right. And on the Democratic side, Louisa?
Oh, it's hard to predict. You could see a wave of young people coming in and really tilting it towards Sanders, while all the more experienced establishment, even the unions, the organizations, going for Clinton. So it's really hard to hazard a guess, but I could see how Sanders might pull this off.
You can see how Sanders. And Paul, what do you think on the Democratic side?
I think in the end, Clinton has a better organization, a better get out the vote mechanism. They know who their voters are. Their data is better. In the end, I think that carries a lot of weight. I think she will win, but by a pretty narrow margin. She's up by about 2 or 3, I think. So not by much, but I think she'll probably pull it out.
This is a lot of fun. I'm going to get out some popcorn and watch. Thank you both very much. That is Paul Brandis of the West Wing Reports and Louisa Savage of Politico in Washington.